right, everybody, it's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. My guest today is Dr. Mark Skousen. He is the Doti-Spogli Chair of Free Enterprise at Chapman University, where I used to teach. In California, is an eighth-generation direct descendant of Benjamin Franklin. That's what his new book is about, Benjamin Franklin. He has a lifetime interest in the grandfather of our nation, not the father of our nation, but the grandfather. Dr. Skousen's career has often followed that of his illustrious ancestor as a publisher, author, financial advisor, teacher, father, public servant, and world traveler. In 2006, he and his wife, Joanne, compiled and edited the completed autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, covering the remainder of his career from 1757 to 1790. And his new book is, here it is again, The Greatest American. I love that title. Benjamin Franklin, the world's most versatile genius. All right, Mark, nice to see you.
It's a pleasure. I'm here in Florida, so it's quite 3,000 miles away.
Okay, well, so you are a indirect or directed descendant, or I don't know how you say that, but 1/512th part of Benjamin Franklin or something like that? How'd you do that calculation?
Point, it's hard to inherit very much of Franklin's unique skills, but we are both left-handed, which is unique. 10% of the population is left-handed, and I am like Franklin, a financial advisor, guru, if you will, and he wrote the Poor Richard's Almanac with lots of one-liners like 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead.
I've used that one.
So we have some, and I'm a father, and I'm not as much of a ladies' man like Franklin was, but.
Yeah, I don't think Joanne would appreciate that.
I have made some contributions to economics. Franklin made his contributions to science. But Franklin once said, "He that boasts of his ancestors does but advertise his own insignificance."
That's great. How many of these do you have memorized? He is so quotable.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. What is it? In investing in knowledge pays the highest interest. That's a really good one. Nothing but money is sweeter than honey. Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Do you do that?
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, getting up early. I have to get up early because the markets open at 6:30 in California, where I teach at Chapman University.
Right.
So I resisted moving to California for many years because of that, but it's worked out. I go to bed at 10 and get up at 6, so it works out okay.
Yeah. All the scientific research on sleep shows that Franklin and our grandmothers were all correct about the need for 8 hours of sleep. Turns out it's true.
Yeah, but what about the people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump who sleep only 4 hours and then they start texting early in the morning? I suspect that's going to lead to an early grave, but
maybe. Well, Trump is pretty old already, and he seems to have limitless energy.
It is amazing.
Well, of course, we don't know how accurate the stories are that they only sleep 4 hours a night. Maybe. But of course, it's the 8 hours on average. Some people need more, some people need less. They could be one of those flukes.
Yeah, I take a lot of cat naps.
I may fall
asleep during this interview.
Churchill took naps, right? I think didn't Franklin take naps?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. We don't know everything about Franklin, although I have 380 pages of talking about how to apply Franklin to today. So I know quite a bit about Franklin, but I don't know what I do know he engaged in air baths. Do you know what that is?
Oh, you lie out naked, right?
Yeah, and he also left the windows open during the wintertime, and he had this, one time he had to sleep in the same room, actually in the same bed with John Adams, and they had big altercation about whether to have the windows open or not. Franklin favored windows open and breathing in that fresh, cold air.
Well, I think that does matter. According to sleep researchers, you should have the room cool and dark. Of course, Franklin didn't need to worry about blue screens from computers and smartphones, but yeah, just going to bed when it's dark and sleeping in the dark, cool night is
And,
good.
he did write a little pamphlet on choosing a mistress, and he did say, in the dark, all cats are gray," in reference to older women because they're so grateful. I mean, it's really quite a clever, which caused John Adams and others to call him a lecher, but he he was definitely. I prefer the term ladies' man.
Well, yeah, your wife wouldn't want you to emulate that part of Franklin's life, obviously. But he was married. So Deborah was his wife, right?
Right, Deborah. There is one of the debates about Franklin, which I address in my book. Is was did Franklin abandon his wife, as
Hmm.
H.W. Brands and several other historians claim? And of course, I would argue probably just the opposite. Deborah actually abandoned him because she had an extreme aversion to traveling, getting on ships and going across the oceans. It was a dangerous time period, and there's no question about that. But her aversion was so extreme, she determined that she would not go to Franklin. Franklin went back and forth 8 times in his lifetime across the Atlantic. And Deborah simply would absolutely refuse to go with them. So they became estranged, I would say is the best word to put it. For 8 or 9 years, they didn't see each other, and then, she passed away, and he did not get back in time to see her before she died, and then he was a widower, in Paris and was quite actively engaged with the women of that era.
Hmm. How long did it take to go across the Atlantic back then?
It was 5 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's a long time. Right.
Depends on which way you go, they did
Yeah.
discover that it's faster one way than the other, so
Yeah, the currents.
the
Right. Yeah,
currents, yeah,
and the
which
winds and all
Franklin
this.
studied as a scientist. He was America's, first scientific American, so to speak. There's actually a
Yeah.
book by that title, and since you are a scientist, I
And
take
I
it
wrote for
you would.
Scientific American.
Well, you were a writer for Scientific American, and I consider you are at Freedom Fest. You are our resident scientist. So we're pleased to have you there every year to create a little controversy and
Yeah.
great insights into the latest in science. It's really nice to have you at our conference.
Well, the Catholic Church has that position of the devil's advocate, the advocatus diaboli. Hitchens used to talk about that. The original position was to debunk miracle claims for a sainthood vote, because they know that people lied, made things up, exaggerated, or just, misperceived things or whatever. And so most of the miracle claims are claims about the artifacts, how many people had a piece of the true cross, and the blood of the saints and those sorts of things. The Catholic Church itself knew that most of that was a bunch of baloney.
Uh,
Not 100%, but enough that they needed somebody to be a debunker.
And Michael, you'd be interested in the Mesmer, Dr. Mesmer, who was
I know
the
all about that.
Austrian
Yeah.
scientist who came over to France and said he could get people to do all kinds of things if they were mesmerized. And Franklin he was assigned by the king to decide whether this was accurate or not, and he tested the theories, he looked at the evidence, and he debunked it rather viciously. So he's definitely your kind of scientist who's always testing the theory with evidence. Is there evidence?
Oh, we know all about that because we republished in its entirety in Skeptic magazine Franklin's analysis of mesmerism. It was originally published in French, so I had to have it translated. It had never been translated and published in English, so we were the
Mhm.
first to do that in Skeptic. And he really did do controlled experiments. So this is really quite innovative for 18th century, where he had like a placebo group. Like he'd tell a group of these hysterical people that the tree was mesmerized, or this was mesmerized, or that person, or whatever, and then see what their response would be. And it was always whatever the people were told was mesmerized, or was magnetized with the magic incantations they put on it. Then they would respond accordingly. They'd get all Yankee and stuff. And anyway, so I thought that was pretty impressive at that time.
Yeah, and actually Franklin did the same with his kite experiment. This was his way of determining. Everybody saw the lightning, and it was lightning electricity. Nobody really knew for force. So Franklin, through his experiment, which was later verified, is proved, and Pennsylvania was a perfect location for this because in England and in Europe, the lightning storms do not occur as frequently as they do for some reason in the Northeast. And so he took a great risk with his son engaging in that kite experiment. And he developed this uniform theory of electricity, which makes him from what I understand, one of the top 100 scientists of any age.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's also in a book called The 100 Philosophers. So Franklin, I think, even though I'm biased with my genealogy, calling him the greatest American, I do think there's good evidence one could make a case for him, as opposed to, say, Thomas Jefferson, who was a philosopher and a scientist.
Yeah.
And certainly an ambassador and legislator and so forth. But I came up with 22 careers that Franklin had at one time or another.
Mm.
I mean, I've thrown in a stand-up comedian. Maybe that's not a career. But he really exceeds everybody else. Thomas Edison, even Elon Musk, they tend to concentrate on one area. But Franklin was a he was a master of most trades, and that's pretty unique.
Of course, was it easier to do then because there wasn't as much to know and there was more flexibility and range across professions, as opposed to today where you have so much specialization, you have to get a degree and so on, that you're kind of slotted into a narrow range.
Yeah, actually, Michael, the key for Franklin, was he was so successful as a printer, as a businessman, that he retired at age 42, turned his business over to a partner of his, and he received an annual royalty based on the success of the business. And then he spent his time devoted to experiments in science and writing in science, and then civic duties and being involved as improving the standard of living of his local people. So he didn't just retire and go and play golf for the rest of his life, and I really admire that. And that's a lot of his other professions came about because of his leisure time. One can make for being successful in business that gives you the leisure time to do these things.
Well, I would put Jefferson up there with him. I'm reminded of JFK's comment at the dinner he was hosting at the White House for all the Nobel laureates, and said, "This is the greatest collection of minds since Thomas Jefferson dined here alone."
Yes, that's a good point. But of course, he couldn't have said Franklin, because Franklin was not a president. He was
Right.
too old to become president. But he is in many ways the grandfather of our country. And you mentioned Thomas Jefferson. So there's two areas where Jefferson and Franklin, I mean, they were best of friends. And in fact, Jefferson replaced Franklin, and actually he said, "No one can replace Franklin. I simply take his what was it? He said, I'm trying to think of the term he used I succeed Franklin, but
Mm,
I'm not replacing him." That was the
mm,
point he made.
nice.
But there's two areas where there's really an interesting disagreement. One is on commercial society. Franklin was very much in favor of money making and speculation, and he did not buy into the Christian view that money making was a sin, that the Jews were engaged in sinful behavior and so forth. But Jefferson actually thought agriculture was the ideal career, and he kind of rejected the big cities. He preferred the small town type of atmosphere. Franklin loved the big cities. He loved commercial activity. He was in favor of paper money. This is the other area where Jefferson and Franklin disagreed. Jefferson was totally opposed to any paper money. He believed in only gold and silver, hard money. He was a hard money man. He was a gold bug. While Franklin actually wrote a pamphlet once in favor of the printing of money, mainly because the British government prohibited the the minting of gold and silver in the colonies. It was a major point of disagreement with the British and one reason for the revolution. So Franklin wrote a pamphlet in favor of printing of money, and guess what? The legislature approved it, and guess who got the job to print the money? It was Franklin. So he was America's first crony capitalist also. So, but those are two pretty interesting things. I think Franklin would favor a central bank. He's very modern. Of all the founders, he's very modern in terms of his attitude toward racism, toward slavery, toward inflation, toward commercial society, towards women's revolution, women's liberation. All of those things, Franklin, and this is, I should say in my book, and the important thing of why my book is different, The Greatest Economist is not a biography. It's not a biography of Franklin.
Greatest
It's
American.
it's 80 short chapters
Yeah.
on how to apply Franklin to today's hot topics and business and investing and personal finance and healthy living. He lived to be 84. So there's a lot of things that you can draw upon in discussing Franklin's issues today, and one of them is his defense of big cities and commercial society and central banks and secular lifestyle and so forth. There's a lot to be said there that you would, Franklin said, "I wished I was alive 200 to 300 years from now. I would really enjoy modern society." And I think that's really true.
He'd be online. He'd have an X account with 1 million followers or 10 million.
He would
Yeah.
be texting. He'd have a cell phone. He'd have the HD TV. He would love streaming.
Yeah.
The only thing he
So
would, yeah, go ahead.
on the central banking issue, that wasn't that Hamilton's argument also against Jefferson and Adams.
Yes,
Jefferson
for
and Adams
sure.
both saw the future of America as more agricultural, whereas Hamilton and Franklin saw it as more industrial. So how did he get on with Hamilton?
Well, pretty well. I mean, he died in 1890, so some of these events on central banking and
1790.
so forth came out afterwards, but there was some sympathy there. Franklin owned shares in the Bank of North America that Hamilton and other founding fathers, Robert Morris, were involved in. So I would think Franklin would be very sympathetic with the idea of a central bank, and this is one of the big arguments I have with libertarians who think that Hamilton was making a big mistake with his central bank and the issuing of paper, of the long-term bonds. But look, he created a sinking fund to pay off the national debt. It was a very successful issuance of taking over the state banks and creating a more central government. And so I think it turned out to be really well as opposed to the French Revolution, which turned out very badly. So I give pretty high marks to Hamilton myself, and I think Franklin would too.
What is it about that time period and this particular cluster of individuals that stands out so much in just not even just American history, but world history? I mean, Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, Hamilton, Adams. I mean, these are just stellar geniuses in all fields that created a new country. How much of that is just, the great man theory of history versus it was just the timing, just the perfect timing when we needed some people to start a new country, and they happened to figure it out the right way.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that sense of American exceptionalism that has continued to this day, even in stock market performance. I mean, I'm a financial writer, And it is interesting that the studies that have been done say that at least since 1900 and maybe even earlier, uh, American stocks have outperformed, the indexes have far outperformed other country funds. And lots of studies have done that. And it continues even into the 21st century. Uh, so the whole idea of this exceptionalism, I think, is very real. Franklin advocated this. He said America will become a happy and prosperous nation. He definitely influenced Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations that came out in 1776, which was a declaration of economic independence. Came out of the same year as Jefferson's Declaration of Political Independence. And Franklin influenced Adam Smith in his book, The Wealth of Nations. His section on America is very positive, and in fact, Adam Smith predicts that he predicts that America will be a formidable, one of the greatest nations in the world, and this is found in The Wealth of Nations.
Hmm.
So it's really and at the same time, Adam Smith influenced Benjamin Franklin to become a free trader. So there's lots of evidence that Franklin would not be happy with the trade war that's going on and this protectionism and all of this sort of thing. He actually said no nation was ever ruined by trade. So it's very much an Adam Smith kind of thing. And Alan Greenspan, in his latest book about America and capitalism, says that the United States represents Adam Smith's system of natural liberty and the invisible hand better than any other country in the world.
Mm.
So I have a chapter 27 in my book, The Greatest American, it's called Benjamin Franklin, Adam Smith's Invisible Hand.
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
And by the way, Adam Smith also advocated in The Wealth of Nations American independence. Imagine how controversial that was in 1776 at the beginning of the war.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Chapter 29. Yeah. Benjamin Franklin.
Chapter
Adam
29.
Smith's
Sorry.
Invisible Hand. Right. Yeah. No, I like that. Can you just riff for a second on this idea of paper currency? I mean, right at the moment, we're based on fiat currency. It's just the value of the dollar is just because the United States government says it's valuable and everybody else agrees. There's kind of a fiction to it, a useful fiction. We all agree because it's not based in gold or so. So if libertarians had their way and we had just all kinds of currencies, wouldn't it break down? People just need to have, kind of a common currency that we all agree we're all going to honor that. And if you had multiple kinds of that, then that could break down in trust.
Yeah, and look, I've lived in Europe when they had 12 different currencies, right?
Mm.
And traveling through there, and the bid-ask spread and the commissions and stuff. I mean, it was very hard to compare prices in one country and another. So the euro, I think, has been a great success in, I don't know, in a sense, top-down monetary policy in the sense, and you're dependent on the European Central Bank to make sure they don't overinflate. And Franklin was concerned about that. Franklin changed his mind on a number of issues, and one of them was on inflation. So initially, he was very favorable of a little inflation. He felt a little inflation is beneficial. It stimulates commercial activity, but you don't want to go too excessive. And that's what happened during the American Revolution. Not worth a Continental was due to the runaway inflation.
Mm.
And so Franklin warned. He said, you can have too much inflation. So he was kind of in the middle. But I do tell you one thing that was really pretty funny. He said, well, all you tax evaders, you farmers out there that refuse to pay your taxes, well, guess what? We're going to deflate the currency, and that's going to force everyone to pay some part of their wealth to the government to pay for this war. So I thought that was a pretty interesting comment.
So just to put brackets around this, he died in 1790. What was his birth date year?
He was born in 1706.
Oh, 1706.
So he
okay,
died
yeah. Right.
age 84. So he was he lived far beyond what the average person did, and he was a whole generation older than the other founding fathers of Washington, Jefferson,
So you think he
Adams.
would have been a president had he been younger?
He actually was governor of Pennsylvania. They appointed him governor of Pennsylvania, and he actually did run for um, Pennsylvania legislature several times, and he won and he lost. So he had political experience, and yes, I think he would have made a great president. But he was just too old and enfeebled. He did have a lot of um, setbacks. The gout, the kidney stones,
Mm.
old age. But he said, even despite the kidney stones and old age and the gout, he loved life. He said, God has been good to me, and I can't complain. So he had an optimistic attitude toward all things, and he did believe in an afterlife. He did think, I'm looking forward to the science of the afterlife, to be able to travel
Right.
from one star to another in little time and all this sort of thing. He was quite optimistic about the world and the next life as well.
I love his proposed epithet, the body of B. Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for
Food for
worms.
worms.
But the work shall
Will
not
not
be wholly
wholly be
lost,
lost.
for it will, as he believed, appear
believed.
once more
More
in a new and more perfect edition,
edition,
corrected and
corrected
amended.
and amended by the author.
That
Now,
is pretty clever.
he wrote this. People would ask him for this, and he would write them down. It's basically, it's funny. He was not particularly Christian. He was considered a heretic, a deist, but most people thought he was a non-believer because he was not a churchgoer. He had his own liturgy, and he would study on Sundays and occasionally attend church if he was invited to. But he was very supportive of all other religions. And he did have a basic belief system of belief in providence, that he would. Well, first he was a deist. Actually, you'd be interested in this, Michael, because I think Benjamin Franklin is the right kind of scientist who eventually was converted to some form of active theism, if you will. So he started off as a deist. He was very skeptical of most faiths, and he certainly did not like religion that was simply preaching and you attend church and you nod your head and then you go about your business. He believed that religion should all be about being useful in good works and charity. And so he was very involved with, for example, George Whitefield, the Methodist preacher. He helped fund the Negro School of Philadelphia. He attended one day he and Reverend Whitefield attended the Negro School, and he said, and I was surprised to learn that the black young people were just as smart as the whites.
Mm.
And this began his transformation, changing his views. And at the end of his life, he was an abolitionist, and he joined with other groups who were. He was the president of the Philadelphia Society to abolish slavery. He made a major change in there, and he also made he changed his views on religion as well, because he gives this speech at the Constitutional Convention. It's at the end of the speech where he's advocating that we have prayers in the Constitutional Convention. They were at loggerheads, and they weren't willing to compromise on the representation in the House and the Senate. But in this speech, Franklin says, have we not witnessed that God intervened so that we would win this war of independence?
Mm.
The longer I live, the more I know that God governs in the affairs of men.
Mm.
So that's when he says that, he's switching from a deist who winds up the clock and lets it run, no miracles at all, to a belief that God was on the side of the Americans. And he, so he
You
but
sure he's
at
not
the
just
end,
being metaphorical there, or just playing with some
I don't know.
literary tropes?
one of the a reverend from Yale wrote him a letter near the end of his life, and he said, "Dr. Franklin, tell us your basic views about religion." And he said, "Well, I believe in a good God that he cares about us, and he does he supported us in the revolution and so forth, but it's good works and not just sermonizing that makes a difference. And I do believe in an afterlife," he said. "I'm looking forward to it." Uh, but he said, as to whether Jesus was the savior of the world, I think I can, instead of troubling with all the research and stuff, I think it'd be a lot easier for me to find out just in the next year or so, one way or another, when I die.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
So
Well,
I,
well,
I
you,
think he had that kind of open-mindedness and
hmm.
that on religion and so forth that I would like to see more scientists have. And you're very inquisitive yourself. You have religious people on your program all the time. We're going to have a debate at Freedom Fest, similar to the discussion you had with what
Well,
was
Michael
the
Egnor, yes,
Yes, right,
right on the
exactly.
mind, the
That's gonna be
soul.
fun at Freedom Fest. I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to that.
Well, you got to keep an open mind. First of all, I might be wrong.
Yep.
And second of all, I want to be good friends with deeply religious people just in case, I have somebody on the inside to put in a good word for me. Like, don't send that one to hell. He's one of the good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned that Franklin was involved in the authoring of the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the U.S. Constitution. That's astonishing. I mean, wouldn't it be great just to have contributed to just one of those? Okay. So here's what I wrote in the moral arc, because I like this, the connection between science and politics. Even the fundamental principles underlying the Declaration of Independence, which is usually thought of as a statement of political philosophy, were in fact grounded in the type of scientific reasoning that Jefferson and Franklin employed in all the other sciences in which they worked. Consider the foundational line, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." In his biography of Benjamin Franklin, Walter Isaacson recounts the story of how the term self-evident came to be added to Jefferson's original draft by Franklin on Friday, June 21st, 1776. Quote, "The most important of his edits was small but resounding. He crossed out, using heavy backslashes that he often employed, the last three words of Jefferson's phrase, 'We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable,' and changed them to the words now enshrined in history, 'We hold these truths to be self-evident.' The idea of self-evident truths was one that drew less on John Locke, who was Jefferson's favorite philosopher, than on the scientific determinism espoused by Isaac Newton and on the analytic empiricism of Franklin's close friend David Hume. In what became known as Hume's fork, the great Scottish philosopher, along with Leibniz and others, had developed a theory that distinguished between synthetic truths that describe matters of fact, such as London is bigger than Philadelphia, and analytic truths that are self-evident by virtue of reason and definition. The angles of a triangle equal 180 degrees, or all bachelors are unmarried. By using the word sacred, Jefferson had asserted, intentionally or not, that the principle in question, the equality of men and their endowment by the Creator with inalienable rights, was an assertion of religion. Franklin's edit turned it instead to an assertion of rationality. That's astonishing.
Yeah, it's amazing how just one word change, or three words, sacred and undeniable to self-evident, was his way of his support of basically a rational scientific approach rather than a religious approach. Now, bear in mind that this is right at the beginning of the revolution, and this is before Franklin recognized these miracles that occurred with George Washington, who was not particularly that great of a general. He lost a lot of wars and a lot of battles, I should say, and there was a lot of luck involved, and of course, there was the East River story where there was all this fog and so forth, and somehow that allowed Washington to escape the British armies, and this sort of thing happens so frequently that this is why Franklin actually changed his mind. So I'm of the opinion that Jefferson's original language is more accurate.
Mm.
Yeah, sacred and undeniable. And I actually think Franklin would go back to that and say, yes, undeniable is the same thing as self-evident in
That's
many
true.
ways.
That's
But
true. Yeah.
adding the word sacred may have been appropriate from both Jefferson's and Franklin's point of view. Jefferson didn't oppose Franklin's change. He accepted that change. But if you think about it, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. The more you say that, it sounds beautiful. Self-evident is a little bit jarring.
Mm.
And the rest of it's fantastic. We hold these truths to be self-evident or sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and endowed with their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of money.
Right.
Actually, I do this when I've
I
actually
know.
appeared as Franklin a number of times, and I do say that at the end so I can get a big laugh, because a
Yes.
lot of people have accused Franklin of being more money-oriented than happiness-oriented.
But in
And maybe
terms
they go
of,
together.
let's talk about the put all this into context for us of European history up to that time. It wasn't at all self-evident for most European countries that this is the way a government and a society should be structured.
Well, as a matter of fact, this gets back to Adam Smith, where there was that attitude of top-down authoritarianism, and you didn't trust people engaged in self-interest. Adam Smith's The Invisible Hand, that the self-interest would guide individuals to benefit the public. This invisible hand doctrine was very controversial. It was a vice. Self-interest and selfishness, even today, selfishness is a vice, but even self-interest, as objective as that term is, was considered a vice. And so the mercantilists at that time were very much in favor of meticulous intervention in the economy and the wealth of nations. Adam Smith goes into great detail. I mean, you even had to have permission to move from one city to another. You needed to be apprenticed to have a particular trade. There were all kinds of tariffs and regulations that encouraged the importing of gold and silver, but you didn't want to import goods and stuff. So, yes, this was a doctrine of the Enlightenment that was very new and considered very dangerous. And basically what Jefferson and Franklin and Adams were advocating was self-rule. Not rule by the monarchs, but self-rule by individuals who may be commoners. So this was a dangerous doctrine. Even democracy in general was viewed with great suspicion, even by the founding fathers. They wanted a republic. And as Franklin said at the end of the Constitution, was asked, well, what kind of government do you have? And he says, a republic if you can keep it. And he was very worried. Franklin actually warned that America faced the possibility that a king someday will rule over us. And when you look at the number of executive orders that Trump and other presidents have signed, that's one-man dictatorship in that respect. I mean, I guess they asked for advice from others, but you're seeing unprecedented number. Well, I guess FDR had more and faster number of executive orders during the Great Depression, but still, Trump is doing a lot more than Obama and Bush and all these other. Even Biden. I think he's exceeding his authority there, and he was a big believer in the balance of power between the legislature and the judiciary and the executive. And we need to get back to that balance for sure. I mean, taxation, tariffs is supposed to be in the hands of Congress, not the president. I think the Supreme Court is probably going to rule on that. It's going to be a close vote, though, I think.
Is that in the Constitution about tariffs, or is that a later interpretation?
Specifically, Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress alone the power to decide taxes and tariffs.
Article 1, Section 8. Okay, I have it here.
This This is the one you can drive a truck through because it's the power to print money, and it's the power to tax.
Oh, yeah, it's long. Congress
Yeah,
shall
and
have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Oh, yeah, it goes on for two more pages.
And by the way, Section 9 or Articles 9 and 10 talk about the limitations of Congress and the president and so forth. And there it says that no state can impose tariffs or regulations across state lines.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the called the dormant commerce clause rather than the active commerce clause, the dormant clause, and it is responsible for the free trade zone that all
Mm.
50 states enjoy in the United States. And this is a really important point as to why America has been so successful, because for years it was the largest free trade zone in the world. And we didn't do a lot of foreign trade as a result of that. So you could have a high tariff policy and it wouldn't really hurt economic growth. But in today's world, where you have globalization and 25% of our economy is now imports of automobiles and appliances and toys and all the other supplies. In fact, 40% of U.S. made Fords and GM products, 40% come from foreign components. So we're a globalized economy, and you can't just close the borders and stop trade completely. That would be a disaster.
Yeah, here it is. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties or imposts or exports except what may absolutely be necessary for executing its inspection laws. And the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by the state on import or export shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States. And yeah, I mean, this is all it kind of bogs down on what you mean by these things. But so the the tariff money that we're now putting on foreign countries' goods coming to the United States, where does that money go? The U.S. Treasury?
Yes, it goes to the federal treasury only, and I think so far we brought in $152 billion. It's double what we got last year. So there's this sudden new source of revenue, and Trump is very excited about it. Oh, this can reduce the national debt and so forth.
Yeah,
But Congress is already talking about new spending plans with this new money coming in. So
of
I'm not
course.
sure you're going to really reduce the deficit as a result of this or not. But we need to learn, we need to realize that the free trade zone in the United States between 50 states is really great. In fact, during the pandemic, you notice that you could drive anywhere in the United States crossing state borders without being stopped. I mean, they briefly tried to stop people in Florida, but they were not able to do so because of the Constitution.
Hmm.
So there's a lot to be said for that. And of course, so there's a lot of libertarians who don't think there should be any borders between countries either, but I think
Hmm.
that's a whole different debate.
Well, we don't live in that world. I mean, I get that. That would be nice, but that's not the world we live in. Maybe 500 years from now, there'll be no political borders. But um, yeah, so but back to the self-evident on the political side. The idea of division of powers and checks and balances. All that was pretty new, also in the 18th century.
Yeah, so the Constitution, Franklin said in his final address that he's not sure we could have gotten anything more perfect than the Constitution. And he was so much in favor of it. And only got 39 delegates to sign it. There were 56, I think, that signed the Declaration of Independence. But when they meet in 1787, they could only get 39,
Hmm.
and they had to add the Bill of Rights. Thank goodness they added the Bill of Rights to that as well. And you got uh, I think I mean, there's some problems with the Constitution. Certainly, we needed some limitations on taxation, and we probably need a balanced budget amendment and stuff like that. And we've had 27 amendments to the Constitution over 250 years. So, but he was so enamored with this that he sent copies of the Constitution to his friends in the UK and Germany and France and Italy and so forth. Balance of power is really one of them, and the rights of minorities, which is extremely important in the Bill of Rights, is very. I'm really glad that that was added as well. So I think overall, this Constitution has been imitated more than any other constitution in the world. So I don't buy into the argument that it's old-fashioned and we need a new constitutional convention and all that sort of thing. I think we're doing pretty well. I mean, we're trying to. Some people are trying to get rid of the electoral college and so forth, but there's a nice balance between. Small states and the large states, which is what that balance, that big debate was all about.
Yeah. Where did they get all these ideas for the Constitution? I mean, we're told they were Enlightenment thinkers. They were classically trained. They read, about the ancient Greeks and Romans and what they did, and they were, deeply ensconced in the kind of literature on other cultures and societies. How do you think about how they put it all together?
Yeah, I know that Montesquieu, for example, was the one who really emphasized the balance of power between these various groups, and he was French, and of course, the French failed in their balance of power while
Hmm.
the U.S. succeeded. And one of the reasons that was really important, I think, oh, and by the way, I do think that one of the other weaknesses in the Constitution is monetary policy.
Hmm.
We've entered an era of permanent inflation. This is what undue caused the French Revolution, was their runaway inflation that they had. But yeah, they studied the Greeks and the Romans. They recognized the weakness in their systems that didn't properly balance that power. Franklin warned against money and power as the two most powerful forces in the world, and we need to disperse those powers. And they looked, and they were all students of history, and they recognized that was the downfall of all these countries. It gave too much power to a single individual. At one point, Ben Franklin actually proposed 12 presidents instead of one president. He
Yeah.
was he was worried that the executive would get too powerful, and you'd have 12 presidents. The Romans, they learned a lot from the Romans because they had two consuls. They had two emperors at once,
Hmm.
and that's where the president and vice president idea came about. And initially in the Constitution, the opposition became the vice president. The
Hmm.
opposition who lost became the vice president. I can't remember what amendment changed that, but now it's the same
Can you
party.
imagine that now? Vice President Kamala Harris for Trump, I mean.
Well, when those votes were 50-50, I can tell you where she would have voted.
What do you think they would think about today's political parties? Why we essentially have a duopoly that, by some outside critics like Bernie Sanders or even Noam Chomsky and others, that they're really the same. The two parties are not all that different. It's an oligarchy.
Um, yeah, Franklin was his biggest warning was that someday we would have a king rule over us. So one man power, that monarchy, returning to monarchy was his biggest
Hmm.
concern. And when you have a duopoly, then and where the parties they come and go, they talk like they're two completely different parties.
Hmm.
But a lot of times you still have big government, you still have taxation, you still have inflation, you still have wars. They seem to vary from time to time. So money and power is still very much a concern with Franklin. And he said at one point early in his career, and I have a quote in the Greatest American there, the quote where he says that. He says, I am very jealous of the rights of man and any encroachment on those rights will make my blood boil.
Mm.
And I like that quote because it's very similar to Jefferson's statement about over time, liberty is restrained and government grows. Or I can't remember exactly the quote he has there, but there's a lot to be said for this. There's two quotes that I found in completing Franklin's biography that I think set the kind of represent what Franklin actually believed, and more of a laissez-faire Jeffersonian view. So the two statements are as follows: a virtuous and industrious people may be cheaply governed. A virtuous and industrious people may be cheaply governed. Now, when I talk to groups where you have both Democrats and Republicans in the audience, they all agree with that statement. It should be cheap, but government is expensive. I said, do we have cheap government? And they say no. The Democrats favor the big government, the expensive government, but they know it's expensive. And then the other quote is and this is very idealistic: the system of America is commerce with all and war with none.
Mm.
That's a statement. It's very similar to George Washington's farewell address, because he says, avoid foreign entanglements, and you want to expand commerce and voluntary agreements with other nations. That's what you want to do. That should be our foreign policy. Franklin said it in very simple terms: commerce with all and war with none. So I like Franklin's shorter version in that respect, but it's very idealistic because we're attacking commerce now, foreign commerce, and certainly we have not avoided wars. Although I do like Donald Trump's constant reference to the number of people who have died in the Ukraine-Russian war and in the Middle East. He says thousands of innocent people are being killed every day. Can we stop this war, please? Of course, the rhetoric isn't working, but maybe at some point somebody will listen.
Yeah. Then he'll get the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. Somehow I don't think that's going to happen.
No, in fact, I've been traveling outside the United States, and I'll tell you, The Ugly American has come back, that book that was written in the 60s.
Yeah.
People do not think that Trump is friendly. He's xenophobic, seems to have an anger with foreigners, even though he married a foreigner. So it's a little bit hard to explain his attacks on Canadians and Mexicans and Europeans and Asians and so forth. It's I have major problems with that attitude. And Franklin was very different. Of course, Franklin was beloved by the French. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
John Adams, he did not like. In fact, it's really funny. So Franklin was sent over in 1776 to be the first ambassador and to get support from the French to fight the British and to provide loans and armaments and equipment and uniforms and generals and whatever they could do to fight the war. But they sent over 4 other commissioners because they didn't trust Franklin. He was 70 years of age. And so there was Arthur Lee and William Lee, the Lee brothers, Richard Henry Lee, who were very hot-headed. There was Ralph Echard, who was despised by everybody. And then they sent over John Adams, and he brought his wife Abigail. They could not raise a livre, not a single French currency in loans or anything. They didn't like they learned French, but they didn't get along with the French at all. It was really kind of a sad commentary on what was happening there. So they didn't trust Franklin, but Franklin did it all. He raised all the money, armaments, so that at the Battle of Yorktown, the final battle that won the war, half the troops were French, half the ships were French, all the uniforms were French. And without the French help, the war would have lasted another 10 years. Americans probably would have won it eventually by attrition because it's so far away from the UK. But nevertheless, you can really truly call Benjamin Franklin the grandfather of our nation because of what he was able to do single-handedly as ambassador to the first American ambassador to the world.
Good to remember that, to know, be reminded why we always support the French. Like in World War I, there was that call, Lafayette, here we come, or whatever it was. We owe it because of what Lafayette did for us. And I guess that was Franklin's move. Mark, I just want to talk a little bit about Franklin's liberal attitudes toward women and slaves and so on. Very modern, and it's hard to put ourselves back into that time. You and I and everybody pretty much today would think, well, I wouldn't be a slaveholder. I would have opposed slavery. I'm not so sure that for most people that's true. In the same way that, when I show Milgram's shock experiments, my students go, I would never shock anybody. Yeah, I bet you would. And, I would have never been a Nazi. Yeah, I bet you probably would have. Most people just go along with what's common in the time. And at that time, everybody pretty much knew that, blacks and women were inferior. That's it. We just know this is a fact, and therefore we can justify, the stratified society and slavery and so on. So the question is, but not everybody, how come some of these people stood up, the Quakers, and the other abolitionists and Franklin and so on? What is it that you would attribute that to?
Yeah, so I do have a chapter on Franklin's attitude on race, and what was interesting was that Franklin did have slaves. They were servants who helped him out on a day-to-day basis. But at one point, he had a couple that he let go because he found that people who were hired and not slaves tend to be more productive. So he was very utilitarian in that respect. And so he had a couple of slaves that he took with him to London. Again, these are servants. So he didn't have a plantation or anything like Jefferson and Adams and George Mason and people like that who on paper, who publicly said they were against slavery, but didn't have the guts to release their slaves or let them be free and let them work on the plantation and just hire them and pay them a legitimate wage. So Franklin, after that incident at the Negro school where he saw that blacks were just as smart as white kids, he gradually changed his mind and became an abolitionist and let his slaves go, or when they ran away, he didn't try to get them back. And so, and then at the end of his life, he became the president of the Philadelphia Society to Abolish Slavery. And he got Congress to introduce legislation right before he died, suggesting that slavery be abolished, absolutely abolished. And of course, the South opposed it, and they tabled it, and it never really got anywhere. And he wrote a little satire about white slaves in the Middle East. It was a very clever way of poking fun of those who were still advocating slavery. But he was ahead of his time because you even go back, Woodrow Wilson, for example, was a racist, and he actually segregated the armed forces and didn't allow blacks to visit him in the White House and stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah,
that
really
was
bad.
that was the progressive Woodrow Wilson. And I'm not sure about FDR. I'm not sure he was really that good. It was Harry Truman that finally
Integrated.
desegregated the armed
Yeah.
forces. So
Yeah.
the Democrats don't have a very good record in the past on the issue of racism. But Franklin comes out smelling pretty good compared to Jefferson and Washington. And of course, Adams was the best because he never owned slaves and was opposed to slavery right from the get-go. But Ben Franklin was criticized for running ads for slaves and so forth in his Pennsylvania Gazette. So that was very common back in those days. But I like the fact that he changed his mind. He evolved in his views. And you also ask about women. So one thing that's great about Franklin is that if you wanted to sit down and have a beer with him, and I remember in your blurb for my book, you have the quote about, well, I'd like to
Oh, yeah.
sit down and have dinner with Franklin. It's so the beginning part of the book, your quote is in there.
Yeah.
And so Franklin, his views changed quite a bit because he's the kind of person that you could sit down with and ask a question, and he would pretty much be honest no matter what question you asked, whether it's about women or racism or what have you. If you asked George Washington, why don't you have any children? He would consider that an inappropriate question. If you asked Thomas Jefferson, well, what was your real relationship with Sally Hemings, your
Mm.
servant? Uh, Jefferson would brush that aside. They were Virginians who were very, they were very proud people, and there's some questions you simply didn't ask. But for Franklin, he was very good at answering these questions. And in fact, in his autobiography, he said that he would, he talked about his errata in life, that he fell into he fell into hard to govern passions, and he fell
Mm.
in among low women, he called it in the
Oh, my God.
autobiography. By the way, that
Right.
part was censored in the up until the 1920s. The paragraph about his having an illegitimate child,
Mm.
William, who he beloved, and then at the end, they became totally estranged and they became enemies, unfortunately. That's really another sad story about the effects of the war, the American Revolution.
Mm.
But yes, the evidence is pretty clear that he had only one illegitimate child and that he overcame his errata. He was a devoted married man to Deborah, but then he probably strayed when he spent 8 years separated from his wife as a London agent. There's a there's a drawing by a artist of him kissing a young lady, Franklin
Mm.
kissing a young lady. We don't know who it is. He he was at Craven Street in London. He was his savoir-faire, his je ne sais quoi among the
Mm.
women of London was well
Mm.
known. So he may have been involved with some women during that time period. It's hard to say.
Yeah, probably. Wasn't there some debate, back to the slavery question, with Adam Smith about to what extent slavery is economically sound and rational, or that it should die on its own, economically speaking?
I don't remember that. I've read the entire book, but it's been some time, and I know that that has been a debate topic throughout the years, and I was actually involved in some research back in the 70s with Robert Fogel
Mm.
of the University of Chicago, who wrote a book called Time on the Cross with Stanley Engerman, and they argued that especially during the Cotton era, that slavery was profitable and that
Mm.
that's why it took a civil war, because the vested interests, the economic interests were so strong. I can't remember if Adam Smith, he may have he addressed everything, so I'm sure he talked about that, but I don't recall where he came down on that particular issue. I do think he was an abolitionist and was opposed to slavery, as I recall, but I
Okay,
don't know the reasons.
back to some of Franklin's economic and financial advice. Talk a little bit about compound interest, the power of compound interest. I still think this is today one of the most unappreciated ideas of all time.
Yeah, so Franklin did a little experiment in his last will and testament. He gave £1,000 to Boston and £1,000 to Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia. He said, you need to invest it in a bank at interest, which at the time was around 4 or 5% for 100 years. And then after 100 years, you can now loan this money out at interest loans to artisans and tradesmen and they had to pay it back and so forth. Well, didn't go exactly as planned. And in fact, I think after 200 years, they dissolved both of these funds. And I think together it was like it came out, they invested £1,000, which was $5,000 each at the time. And it was worth $13 million in the early 1990s when they dissolved the two funds. So it was really a remarkable success story on the power of compounding. I just wrote an article in my newsletter, Forecasts and Strategies, on this example using the Ben Franklin example, but then bringing it up to date. And I said, well, I've held a dividend-paying stock called Main Street Capital for over 12 years. Let's look at what the return is. And if you invested the money at the beginning and you simply, they pay a monthly and a quarterly dividend, they're quite generous in their dividends. If you took that dividend and spent it, your $100,000 would be worth $500,000 today. Okay. But if you had reinvested the dividends, your $100,000 would be worth like $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
So, you doubled your money by reinvesting the dividends. It was really a spectacular evidence for compounding. And so I recommend compounding a lot in today's world. If you live to 30, 40, 50, 60 years and you reinvest that money in your 401k, especially dividends, you're going to do really well. So I do have a chapter on that as well.
Mm-hmm. All right, Franklin's 13 virtues. Let me just rattle them off, and then we can go through a few of them that you want to pick. Temperance, silence, order, resolution, frugality, industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity. It's the early version of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. So, pick a few you want to riff on.
Well, the first thing that you may notice about these rules is they're very self-centered. There's not a single one of the virtues there is about other people.
Oh, interesting. Right.
Modesty,
it's sort of self-help.
silence, it's all self-interest. There's nothing there about charity, helping other people, which is really kind of interesting.
I didn't notice
he wrote this. He wrote this autobiography late in life. You would think that he would be focusing on other things. And even at the end, the final one is, of course, humility. And he was told by one of his friends, he said, well, these are all great virtues, but of course, you've left one out. And he says, what's that? Humility, because you're known as a very vain person, self-centered, vain person. So he added humility, but again, it's self-focused.
Right.
And which is odd because his criticism of religion is that it's too self-focused and you need to focus on other people. So I think those who saw the 12 and 13 virtues should have recognized the defect in looking, love your neighbor as yourself, right? He says to imitate Jesus. Well, what did Jesus taught? He taught, love your neighbor, right?
I guess.
Good Samaritan.
Maybe that's religion's job, is to teach those morals about how to interact with other people. So Franklin was doing, his list is something different. This is how to be a better person.
I suppose it's something that you could do yourself and you don't depend on others, but still, he should have said, do a good turn daily, like the Eagles, like the Boy Scouts.
Right. Justice, wrong none. Well, here's one sort of wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. That's sort of other oriented.
What was the thing he said about virility, the one about sex?
Let's see. Well, there's chastity, rarely use venery, but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. That's a
I'm not
weird one.
sure that reads well
It doesn't
today.
read well. No, these are, yeah, these are definitely 18th century sentences. Yeah, temperance, eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you eat too much, you feel lethargic and you feel bloated and, yeah, you feel dull, right? Um,
Yeah, that
Silence,
was one of
speak
his
not but
problems. He
what
had the
may
gout.
benefit others. Yeah, I don't know. Avoid trifling conversation.
Well,
No chit
that
chat.
yeah, I've met some people who didn't believe in small talk, and they were always so arrogant. You got to have a little small talk, right?
Yes,
Nothing
yes,
wrong with that. What's the weather? You say, talk about that a
yes.
little bit.
Most conversation is chit chat. Um, yeah, for practical reasons. I mean, you can't talk about the nature of the universe all the time or God or whatever.
One of the things I do like about Franklin is his involved with civic affairs. He was constantly looking around and seeing how you could improve things. He started the first hospital. He was the first
Mm.
fundraiser, matching funds. He created this concept of matching funds with the hospital there. He did the first public library. He started the University of what became the University of Philadelphia, the Negro School of I mean, he did so many things to help pave the roads and light the streets and, to reduce crime. He started the Junto. So the Junto was this initially, it was kind of a private affair limited to 12 people. It was a secret get-together, but eventually it became more publicly known, and he would gather together artisans of all sorts, and they would come together to decide, well, what can we do to learn more about our trade, to improve our the technologies? What can we do to improve the community and stuff like that? I mean, he's very civic minded in that respect, and none of those are in the 13 virtues.
Right. Yeah. So obviously that has a different role there. You write that he had a preference for private welfare and charities rather than state-run social programs and welfare. Yeah. So I mean, today it's in the United States. I think it's 21% of GDP is allocated for social programs and transfers and so on. I wonder what Franklin would think of that.
He wanted cheap government, he wanted cheap and better government.
Hmm.
And that's the same thing in business. What do you want in business? You want lower prices and a bigger market and better products, lower prices and better products. So if he were running for office, he would say, I want cheaper and better government. That would be his slogan. Uh, he was very critical. I mean, he favored the poor laws because it was a basic thing to help people out. And a lot of times individuals were, there were a lot of Scrooges out in the world who didn't give to charitable causes and stuff. But he did defend wealthy people. He said wealth is the basis of a welfare system. The poor laws were passed by wealthy people in England who wanted to help out. So he would not be in favor of crushing the billionaires of today and making it illegal to be a billionaire, for example. That kind of I think he would be opposed to that kind of view.
So maybe he would support that fortune list of the billionaires who have pledged to give all their money away. So it's not a
I
government enforcement; it's a
I, I think
self-enforcement.
I think it's 50-50 though, isn't it? You give up to
Oh, is that what
50%
it
of your
is? Okay.
yeah, that's what the giving
Oh,
um
right.
uh, p- plan is to give 50% of your wealth to others. And I like what uh, I also think Warren Buffett is, who loved, by the way, Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett were big fans. I have another chapter in my book on that subject. Warren Buffett and Charlie. They both maintained a kind of a low profile. Warren Buffett, I
Hmm.
think, still lives in his home of a three-bedroom home and so forth.
Hmm.
There's something to be said for that kind of low profile as opposed to the Bill Gates of the world who have a 25,000 foot mansion and all that sort of thing. So I do think that you need to maintain a bit of a low profile rather than uh, showing off all of your money and that sort of thing. There's something to be said for that.
What was that book, The Millionaire Next Door? They drive a little Toyota, they have a modest house, and you don't even know they're rich.
Yeah, you don't even know they're rich. Yeah, exactly. I recommend that book when I teach economics and personal finance at Chapman University.
At one point in a meeting, Charlie Munger, in response to a question, "What matters most to you?" replied, "Your main duty is to become as rational as you can possibly be. Rationality is a moral duty. Berkshire, their company, is sort of a temple of rationality." Meanwhile, Buffett said that what matters most to him is that Berkshire does well. "If Berkshire wasn't building something that was continuously getting better, I wouldn't be happy."
Yeah, and also I should add that even though Berkshire Hathaway has never paid a dividend, they do believe in compounded interest because they invest in a lot of public companies and companies that do pay dividends. It's just that they don't believe in double taxation, so they trying to be efficient with their money. And if you pay out a dividend, you're taxed twice. So he avoids that. You pay the dividend to the company, but the company adds it to the net worth of the company rather than paying out a dividend to shareholders.
So the stock then goes up even more.
Right, right, and it's
What's the
done
value
well.
of Berkshire stock? I haven't looked in a long time.
Well, Berkshire, the A stock is like $750,000 now per share. It's the
I'll take
highest
one
priced
share, please.
individual stock anyway, and that's why they have the B shares, which trade for like $3,000 a share or something like that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
That's really amazing.
yeah, I'm a
Uh,
shareholder.
you are? I don't have
Oh
any
yeah,
Berkshire.
yeah.
Of course you are. What do you think Franklin would think of Bitcoin and all these alternative currencies?
He's always very open to new technologies. He always wanted to get involved with the latest, but I
What
don't
do you
know.
think of it?
He probably was aware of John Law and the Mississippi bubble and those
Mm.
kinds of situations. He inflation is too much. Inflation is creates a boom bust cycle. I would think interesting. He was involved. There was a banking crisis in the UK when he was in London and he said, I was not hurt by this because I was well diversified and I had money in the best of the banks.
Mm.
So he took a fairly conservative approach with his money, and he was very careful with his money and with his spending habits. And he would chastise his wife for buying too expensive things and stuff like that. So he was more in keeping with the Richest Man in Babylon, the George Clason kind of book about no matter how much money you spend, you got richer, and but no revenue is sufficient without economy. He emphasized economy, and there's much revenue in economy. Okay, what does he mean by that? There's much revenue in economy. So in other words, if you cut back, a penny saved is a penny earned, right?
Mm.
Penny saved is a penny earned. So that means that no matter what your situation, if you live within your means and you watch, you control your expenditures at all times, you can't help but become rich and gain in spending. So Congress could learn a lot from Franklin's statement that no revenue is sufficient without economy. So you have all this new money coming in with the tariffs. Now, do you spend it or do you return it to do you pay off your debts? And Franklin would say, you have a responsibility to pay off your debts. He advocated that. He was not a believer in a lot of debt. So he would like the sinking fund that Hamilton created when they issued the new national debt and stuff like that. And they did pay off the debt by the 1820s. So there's this natural tendency, if you've left the barn door open, which they do with deficit spending, there's a tendency that even though revenues increase, you spend even all of that and maybe more. It's a very dangerous
It's almost
policy.
like a law of nature. Once you set up a bureaucracy, a government agency, it's almost impossible to kill it. You saw what Musk, the problem he had with Doge. They cut some of the obvious goofier ones, but just didn't add up to much of anything compared to the overall debt.
Yeah, I think Franklin would be very supportive of Doge, the whole idea, but he wouldn't be surprised that it hasn't been very successful.
I mean, I guess it just comes down to every single department has people that are on the payroll, and every one of them wants to keep their job, and no one's going to go along with this. And everyone has some constituency that they have to defend in Congress. I mean, so they're not going to vote for that.
Franklin was a big believer in private enterprise. He considered it one of his biggest mistakes was arranging for his son William to become the new governor of New Jersey before the American Revolution. And when the revolution hit, his son remained a loyalist. And actually, at one point, Franklin accuses him of taking up arms against me. And he said, this was totally against we can all differ on certain issues, but when it comes to family loyalty, it's better that you be on the side of family and not for the government. And then he ends his letter to him. This is a disagreeable subject. I drop
Oh,
it.
wow.
There is anger there, and he actually disinherited him in his will.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really bitter, and this is why Franklin said there's no such thing as a good war or a bad peace because of the break he had with his friends, his science friends of science, his diplomats breaking off relations, families breaking apart. This was a very bad situation. So he did have some regrets at the end of his life, and he told his son Benny, he said, "Listen." You do not want a job that is favorable, that is a government job. You want to engage in private enterprise. That's the key. And so he set up his grandson to become a printer in Boston, which the Aurora is what was published, and it ran afoul with the authorities and with John Adams, as a matter of fact, who tried
Mm,
to put um, Benjamin Bates in jail
mm.
during that time period. So the free press was a real issue back then.
All right, two other hot button issues of today. I wonder what they would have thought back then. Immigration and foreign policy. What do we owe other nations in support and so on?
So on immigration, Franklin favored a very liberal immigration policy, virtually open borders, but it wasn't who you are, but what you could do, what your
Mm,
trade would be, what your skill was. That's all that mattered to him. So he was very much in favor of that. Today's maybe a different situation. U.S. is much more populated than it was back then. There was wide open spaces. It was that open Wild West type of atmosphere. You could handle all kinds of immigrants. I don't know if Franklin would have the same view today. Maybe
yeah.
he would say yes, open borders, but you have to qualify, right? You can't have a criminal record. You can't
Hmm.
be in ill health. You have to know. You have to speak the language. You have to have a work permit. Something that would indicate good people coming in. I think he would be very favorable toward the melting pot, the view that America is a melting pot. Uh, he would like that sort of thing, and he didn't believe in discrimination necessarily from certain groups and stuff. So, I think that would be his policy. Again, he did not, as far as foreign policy is concerned. I think he would be in George Washington's camp to avoid entangling alliances and stuff like that. You want commercial agreements. You want commerce with all and war with none.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot to be said for a. Uh, uh, here's the problem. Here's the problem as to whether who would be considered a neocon today. So he once said that again he sent the Constitution out to all of his friends in Europe, saying this is the greatest document. You need to imitate it, and so forth. So it sounds a little bit like nation building. And at
Hmm.
one point, he actually says, uh, it is my hope that the principles that we have established in the Constitution of the rule of law and the rights of the human beings are so universal so that I could travel to any country and say, this is my country.
Mm.
Well, that sounds a little bit like nation building to some extent, exporting American values and that sort of thing. I just don't know how far you would want to carry that in today's world where you have, since he hated war so much, and he said that should be by far the last resort, not the first resort in any dispute.
He sounds pretty cosmopolitan to me there, though.
Oh, yeah. He
In
loved the big
contrast,
cities.
would he be a conservative today? Probably not, particularly with the emphasis on nationalism, Christian nationalism, sort of closed borders. We are our own tribe and other tribes are, dangerous or a threat and so on. Yeah, he would not
I
be.
don't think he would fit into that category, but at the same time, there are stories where he complained about too many taverns in Pennsylvania. When he came back to Philadelphia, he said, "Oh, there's too many taverns here. The drinking problem is a
I
serious
see the
problem."
drinking problem.
He chastised his daughter for asking from the French ladies to have the latest clothing and stuff sent over.
Hmm,
There are some elements of conservatism
I see.
that Franklin expresses that comes out in the completed autobiography and in my book, The Greatest American. I think I was very careful when I selected the title of this book, The Greatest American, and subtitled, and the subtitle is Benjamin Franklin, the world's most versatile genius. And I've made the argument that this is a book that you could put on your coffee table. So when visitors come, you put it in there, you take it down in the shelf or your nightstand and you put it as a coffee table and people look at it and they can nod their head and say, "Yeah, I could see Franklin as the greatest American and one that I could largely agree with as a person who could unify us as a nation." And he didn't shy away from debates, but he was very careful not to offend people. He made his personal decision not to speak ill of anyone in public,
Mm,
and to listen carefully to the other side and say, "Well, have you thought of this or have you thought of that?" And engage
mm-hmm,
in civil debate. And that's one of the things we've tried to do at FreedomFest instead of the
mm-hmm.
shouting and "Oh, I can't discuss this with you. This is not an appropriate topic," and that sort of thing. I really think I'm onto something here with this book. So I'm hopeful people will buy the book, put it on their coffee table. It's not a typical biography. It's topic by topic, 80 short chapters. It's
Yeah, I
fun
love
to
that.
read. It's available on audiobook. It's an ebook. It's available in every sense. So I'm hopeful that it will be a point of discussion and we can unify each other. So that's my pitch for the
I've
book.
had it in let's just say I've had it in the smallest room in my house, and I read a chapter each day.
Yes. And what's fun is you can jump around.
Oh
You
yeah,
don't have to read it from beginning to end. You can start,
that's right.
including the last chapter, which is called Franklin and His Critics. So I
Right.
do cover the critics as well.
Yeah, Murray Rothbard. Yeah, I was surprised. I didn't know he felt that way about Franklin. Very
Oh
critical
my
of Franklin.
gosh, he really lays into the overinflated ego, and he's an
Yeah, yeah,
opportunist and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, it's so wrong-headed, but it's still it's fun to read what people think of these people that I think would unify everybody, but not everybody agrees on
yeah.
anything.
All right, Mark. Thanks so much.
Michael, all right, be free.